Welcome to Mystara for the first part of a series looking at the immediate threats that each of the Northern Reaches nations are about to face. Today we're headed to Ostland to look at the upcoming Regency crisis, where the young princes will have their fates decided between their mother Ursa and the High Godar Asgrim. Ostland finds itself torn between new, modern, and unproven ways versus older, proven, but stagnant customs. The nation's future depends on which side wins, and by extension, the fate of the Northern Reaches. I'm Mr. Welch, and let's get a Viking. This video covers the official 1010 timeline for Ostland. While many prefer the 1005, that one's not canon, despite the feedback I've received. To summarize 1005 briefly so there's no confusion, Heldonic knights take over Ostland while their warriors are rampaging in Alphatia. Then Thyatus drives out the knights and decides to stay. King Hord dies in Alphatia, leaving his son Finn in charge, though underage. Thyatus rules with a hands-off attitude, but any amount of resistance is put down hard, leading to the execution of the youngest Prince Geir. King Finn defeats the Alphatian would-be Emperor Xandar through guile, and as a reward by Thyacian Emperor Eusebius, he is allowed to rule Ostland autonomously, much like Duke Stefan and Keramikos. Now that that's out of the way, it's time for the complete mess that is Ostland's Court of Canute. I tried making this video as close to canonical lore as possible. Still, after the game switched to 2nd edition, Ostland was reduced to a background nation with little in the way of information about it for the entire run of the almanacs. Seriously, it has 3 mentions in the first almanac's timeline, all of them referring to the same incident. Still, that's 3 more mentions than Vestland gets, which means the following video is going to be a nightmare. So forgive me if I fill in some blanks. I'm trying to make sense of a story arc that has some serious plot holes. So where the Gazetteer disagrees with the almanac, I'll go with the almanac. So King Hord dies raiding Alphatia rather than the one holdout Ostlandic island. Just for examples. Enough of the clarification. It's time to get this crisis started. The Regency crisis is set up in the Northern Reaches book, but King Hord Darkeye doesn't join his ancestors for another 13 years during the Immortals' War fighting on behalf of Thyatus. There are 3 principal characters involved in this, and the 2 princes, surprisingly, aren't either of them because they don't even get stats until much later. The king is your stereotypical Viking, though he's on the wrong side of his adventuring days. King Hord's lack of foresight starts the crisis, because you can't have a Regency crisis with a living king. His wife is Ursa the Younger, and she's his second wife. Hord first married Rora Anslaf's daughter, and that marriage was a loving one, though Rora died childless. Ursa was a political marriage that was considered a joke because she was just there to bear children. She is politically adept and forward-thinking, but unpopular in court because she wants to shake up the Ostland tradition to modernize it like other nations. Asgrim the Bowed is the high priest of Odin and has long held the ear of Hord. He desires to control the country through influence and to isolate Ostland even further, especially religiously. He's popular with the Jarls, but the lower-class citizens are wary of him. King Hord Darkeye has sat on the Ostlandic throne for 20 years, and the nation has prospered under his rule. He has kept with the tradition of raiding and supported warriors that followed his lead. The fighting men of Ostland are devoutly loyal to him, but his methods have isolated his nation from the world because nobody likes the guy who beats them up and takes their stuff. While the warriors have prospered under their king, the farmers and merchants have struggled with the lack of trade. When his wife died 4 years ago, Hord realized he needed heirs, so he married Ursa, cementing relations with another powerful clan. She bore him 2 sons in 4 years, and Hord couldn't have been happier. He dotes on his sons and lets his wife do whatever she wants in appreciation for his new heirs. She's also borne him a daughter, but more on her later. Hord still has a love of combat, but he's content to watch monster fights put on for his entertainment. He gets so wrapped up in his pastimes and games, he's never set up a plan for what happens in case of his death. Finn was only 2 in the year 1000 AC, so a regency should have been set up as a contingency. From the title, you know this never happened. Asgrim is 10 years the junior of King Hord, but is officially ruled in his stead when the king was at sea on diplomatic missions, or more often raiding the coast. This is Ostland law. Kings are expected to lead their men in combat, and the High Priest of Odin rules when the king is unavailable in court. This has prompted Asgrim to enact laws beneficial to his cult while Hord is out robbing other people. On his return, the king is expected to look at the changes at the first available chance. Still, Hord's hands-off rulership means he usually approves the measures without reading them. Asgrim intends to rule as regent on Hord's death, and then when Prince Finn assumes the throne, he intends to use the young king as his puppet. The other Jarls know of Asgrim's power behind the throne, and they're either supportive of it, or they're too scared of him to confront him, especially while Hord lives. Queen Ursa has a knack for politics, mainly the brutal deals the Northmen are famous for. She is a cleric of Odin like Asgrim, but her allegiance is to Ostland rather than the church. The Jarls consider her a good queen. She's borne Hord 2 sons and a daughter and has proven to be quite influential in court. The queen's political goals are admirable. She wants to abolish slavery and increase the power of the lower classes. The problem is she's living in Ostland, where the culture thrives on raiding and fighting. Many like how the nation is run. They don't want to progress to a more enlightened society. Ursa also finds herself at odds with the cult of Odin, despite being a priestess of that faith. The other clerics see Asgrim as a kindred spirit. Ursa would destroy the church's influence if she had her way. She does have the support of several wise women, but their voices alone won't be able to sway the minds of the other Jarls. That brings us to the 3 children involved in the Regency. Crown Prince Finn is the future ruler of Ostland, and he listens to both his mother and Asgrim. He spends his time being tutored by the Queen Regent, but has had almost equal time in religious studies with the High Priest. He is taking both lessons to heart, but shows no signs of which one he's going to follow as his primary advisor. His father is teaching him to be a warrior first and foremost, leaving the task of teaching Finn how to actually rule to his mother and Asgrim. Geirhordson is Finn's younger brother and the one who embraces Ostlandic traditions more. The prince takes after his father and has a natural talent for weapons. He's a bit hot-headed and resents being ignored by those who fawn over his brother. This resentment can even come to the surface if Geir feels slighted enough. The prince has little patience for ruling. He expects people to do what he says when he says it. He is learning from his father the art of leading men into combat. While Hord doesn't believe his youngest son is ready to lead troops by himself, he does take him into combat to show firsthand how to command. The younger prince is starting to take his father's lessons to heart. Princess Ygritte is only 11 years old, but the call of adventure sings to her. The Jarls largely ignore her. Even her parents tend to overlook her for her oldest brother. This hasn't deterred her at all. She knows she's going to be married off to some Jarl's son to secure an alliance or a trade deal. This is her lot in life, and she will obey the customs of her people. That doesn't mean she can't have a little fun, though. She wants to see what she can of the world before she grows up, even if the world for her is just the northern reaches. She has become quite the escape artist, which isn't hard for a child that is considered an afterthought. She is far braver than she has any right to be, and will pose as a commoner to get on a ship to Vestland for a visit. The queen tends to ignore her daughter until she goes off on one of her adventures. Then people are sent to return the wayward child before someone recognizes her. Discreetly. The Regency crisis starts with the death of King Hord, though the exact date is left vague. Okay, it's briefly mentioned on page 69 of the Poor Wizard's Almanac with a single line saying, "Oh, by the way, the Ostland King is dead." Then Ostland goes into the background for the following 4 books, and it only gets 11 entries on the official timeline, dealing with 3 subplots that essentially go nowhere in the grand scheme of things. I wanted to keep this video to the official storyline as much as possible, but if you aren't Alphatia, Thyatis, Karamikos, or Derrican, you don't get a story in 2nd edition. So it's time to break out the spackle to fill in all the details from barely a paragraph of text. At least I'm not doing Vestland. They get barely half of the mentions. Oh wait, that's the next video. Oh, Jesus Christ. Hord bites it off the coast of Alphatia during a raid on behalf of Thyatis during the war. The exact cause of his death isn't mentioned. We don't know if his ship goes down or if he makes it to Alphatia's soil and dies there. It doesn't matter, the king is dead, long live the king. But you have to wait 4 years for the coronation. Hord didn't leave exact instructions on how Prince Finn was meant to be raised, so the Regency is split evenly between Ursa and Asgrim. They will both raise Finn and help prepare him for when he would sit on the throne. Ursa will handle the Jarls and diplomacy, and Asgrim would provide for the spiritual guidance of the people. With a setup like that, what could possibly go wrong? Ostland faces 3 major challenges in the 4 years of the Regency. The first being the long-lingering spat with Calslow Island, home of the isolated but powerful Ostman clans. These are worshippers of Frey and Freya, and have long been at odds with the Odin cult, even breaking into violence in the past. Calslow Island is one of the wealthiest places in Ostland, and the other Jarls covet it, and Asgrim wants to seize the monasteries and claim the riches for himself. It doesn't help that the islanders are far more open-minded than the rest of their kinsmen, going so far as to welcome outsiders and even wizards to their islands. The Ostman clans aren't without options. Queen Ursa is doing everything possible to prevent a civil war. She believes she can bring Calslow into a coalition of the Jarls that side with her, and present a front that the militant clans wouldn't dare assault. The island has even considered asking to join Solderfjord or Vestland. Ragnar needs men loyal to him as he tries to unify the Jarldoms, while Vestland would love to stick it to Ostland again. In an all-out civil war, Calslow will fall without assistance. However, Solderfjord might make a mess of things and turn the war into a stalemate, where Vestland's superior weapons and tactics makes a victory possible. The second challenge comes from the raiding, a significant part of Ostland's culture. Their targets have been slowly shrinking in number as war has destroyed Alphatia and left other areas impractical to attack. Vestland has developed a solid defense against Ostland, leaving Norwold as their primary target. Even then, the raids are becoming more dangerous and the targets are moving further away. Nations are starting to fight back, though Ostland's naval power is still the largest in the north. At least until Vestland catches up, which should take a few weeks at this rate. The raids hit a significant snag when Prince Geir is captured by Helskir. who holds him for ransom until sending him back with a promise that Ostland stops its attacks. Ursa wants to stop the raids, but Asgrim has more political power in the situation. But even he understands that they must adapt or their neighbors will eventually end the attacks themselves. Lastly, Queen Ursa views a future where every Ostlander is free and the practice of enthrallment is ended. She has a few forward-thinking Jarls supporting her on this, but most of the nobles are perfectly fine with the practice. She does make it a point of freeing all the Jarls in her territory, but emancipating all the thralls nationwide requires the king, not the Queen Regent. A few Jarls follow suit, but the vast majority keep their thralls. Her heart is in the right place, but she lacks the political power to enforce the decision. Both the Queen Regent and the High Priest press Prince Finn to keep either the practice or finally end it, but he shows no indication on his final decision. Finn becomes king in 1013, according to Joshuans, where he is barely mentioned compared to his brother. They don't even give Finn stats. They give Greer stats because he goes off to join Veslin's effort to finally drive out the humanoids there. From what little they give about the new king's reign, he follows the advice of both Ursa and Asgrim, not falling entirely under the sway of either. He backs ending slavery in Ostland, but wants his nation to keep with the tradition of raiding. They never address the Kelslow problem, so that's still at an impasse. The country remains close to Thyatis, working as mercenaries as Eusebius tries to pacify the surrounding regions. Ostland does modernize. Not as much as Ursa hoped, but far more than Asgrim is comfortable with. Thus concludes the Regency crisis of Ostland. Can I complain now about how uneven the second edition books were? They had a lot of story hooks, but only for a few nations. The Northern Reaches gave you a lot of advice on how to deal with the numerous problems facing the three nations in their gazetteer. Then they essentially get ignored in the time jump. Next up is the modernization of Vestland, the nation that probably receives the least mention of any country in second edition that isn't Yalarum. That's going to need a lot of research and even more spackle. Until then, remember, where there's a will, there's a way, and hopefully not a civil war.